Rome wasn't born an empire, it took one. Before ruling the Mediterranean, it faced a rival no one thought could fall. Yet somehow, against history's greatest minds, cultures, and armies, it came out on top. How did it turn the tables on the world's most advanced civilization? Today on the Infographic Show, we're uncovering how Rome pulled off the impossible and conquered Greece. Rome's road to an empire didn't begin with the spilling of blood or a march of legions. It began with a drunken insult that spiraled into a conflict no one saw coming. And that insult lit the fuse for one of the most unexpected conquests in history. The Tarentum Greeks were drunk while celebrating the festival of Dionysius, and it seemed they believed that the Romans were coming for them. There was a treaty barring Roman ships from the Gulf, so the Tarentines sank 4 Roman vessels and butchered many of the men aboard the ships. Then they marched to the Roman garrison at Turi and drove the soldiers out and started plundering. When the Roman Senate sent envoys to demand an explanation for the attack, the envoys were maltreated. A huge insult those days. The envoys wearing their fine togas addressed a crowd on the stage, and the Tarentines mocked their clothes, called them barbarians, and booed at them. This is important, the suggestion being that the Greeks thought themselves superior. In fact, Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote that someone threw excrement on the ambassador's toga. Obviously annoyed, the ambassador replied that the Greeks would pay with blood. We should note that ancient historians, completely biased, often played up the drama. Even so, this was a turning point in history. Rome declared war. But to understand how the Romans and the Greeks ended up on a collision course, we have to go back to when Greece ruled the ancient world. By the time Rome got ideas of becoming an empire, Greece had already perfected the blueprint for the Western world. But it didn't come easy. The Greeks had risen, fought off Persia, and then torn each other apart in brutal wars between Athens and Sparta. Out of the ruins came Macedon, where Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, finally united the Greek city-states. And that changed history forever. No one had seen anything like Alexander's conquests. But all great powers come to an end, and in 323 BC, it was Greece's turn. Alexander was dead, and his world lay in pieces. And in that chaos, Rome found its chance. Southern Italy had been colonized by the Greeks centuries earlier, so much so that it became known as Magna Graecia, or Great Greece. Greek was spoken in its cities, and their temples, theaters, and marketplaces gave the Italian South a very Hellenic look and feel. It was Greece in Italy, side by side with the Italic tribal confederations living in their own less advanced communities. The local tribes traded with the Greeks, but they also fought, allied, and even signed on as mercenaries for Greek causes, including against the Romans. Some of the most important Greek cities included Neapolis, better known as Naples, which became a thriving cultural and commercial hub. And across the water in Sicily, there was Syracuse, a powerhouse that would later play a major role in Rome's rise. The wealthiest of all was Tarentum, a Spartan colony that was rich, powerful, and proud. With a population of 100,000 or more, it wasn't a provincial backwater, it was a bastion of Greek power abroad. The entire region also boasted remarkable intellectual firepower. Some of the greatest minds of the ancient world lived in southern Italy, like Pythagoras, who lived in Crotone. It was through this colonization of Italy that Greek civilization started to influence Rome. The Romans were tough, but they gradually absorbed Greek ideas in art, philosophy, architecture, and religion. But this wasn't a one-way relationship. As Rome's power grew, it began to bleed into Magna Graecia too, and this time the bleeding was literal. In 342 BC, Archidamus III, the king of Sparta, marched his army to southern Italy to aid Tarentum when it was under threat from nearby Italic tribes. He was killed in battle a few years later, leaving Tarentum exposed and vulnerable to attack. In 334 BC, Alexander I of Epirus, the brother-in-law of Alexander the Great, crossed the Adriatic to Tarentum again to help push back the Italic peoples, who, let's face it, had been there long before the Greeks arrived. The aforementioned Samnites, Lucanians, and Bruttians had been raiding, attacking, and making life miserable for the Greek settlers. The Romans farther north weren't ready to dominate all of Italy, not yet, so they stayed out of the chaos in the south. Rome had its hands full fighting the Samnites, a tough, warlike mountain people who refused to bow to anyone, and for now, Rome and the Greek cities weren't enemies, but that wouldn't last forever. Rome was growing fast, and it was only a matter of time before it looked south. It was a precarious time for those Greeks who knew that they'd have to face the Romans sooner or later, so they allied with the Samnites. At first, it didn't seem like a bad idea. In 321 BC, Rome suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of the Caudian Forks, so for a while it looked like the Samnites and their Greek allies might actually hold Rome back. But the Romans came out the winners at the Battle of Sintium in 295 BC. This wasn't good news for the Greeks. Rome was getting closer. Confident and expanding fast, it established a colony at Venusia, which was the Greeks' backyard. Around 20,000 people were stationed there, many of them soldiers, and when Rome moved troops in, it usually meant only one thing. And if that wasn't enough, the Lucanians were threatening smaller Greek cities like Turi, Rhegium, and others. Fearing they would be overrun, these cities didn't turn to their fellow Greeks for help, they turned to the rising power of Rome. Rome agreed and sent troops south. But the soldiers never fought the Italic tribes, instead they were attacked by the Greeks of Tarentum. Their mission ended before it began. After Tarentum's drunken attack and the insult to Rome's envoys, war was now inevitable. The Greeks weren't naive. They had been watching Rome's rise for some time, and they knew exactly what was at stake. The Democrats were eager for war, warning that if they did nothing, Rome would swallow them. Despite the constant infighting between the Greek city-states, each had its own circle of allies. For Tarentum, that ally was Epirus, a kingdom straddling what is today Greece and Albania. It was ruled by Pyrrhus of Epirus, one of the greatest generals in the ancient world, who had married into the Macedonian royal family. He too was wary of Roman expansion, and he was in debt to the Tarentines. Pyrrhus knew that he could enlist the help of various tribes. His master plan was to secure Tarentum first, and then move on to Sicily and drive out the Carthaginians, who controlled much of the island's west coast. Territory Pyrrhus wanted for himself. When that was done, he would reconquer Macedon, which he had lost in 285 BC. So with Macedon still in the back of his mind, Pyrrhus gathered his army and set out to aid the Tarentines, launching the Pyrrhic War. He brought around 25,000 men, 20 war elephants, and a plan to unmake Rome. Another 3,000 soldiers went ahead as an advance force. Meanwhile, the Roman army numbered between 40,000 and 50,000 men. The first clash came at Heraclea in southern Italy. Ancient historians wrote that the Roman legionnaires hurled themselves at Pyrrhus's dense Epirote phalanx but couldn't break through. Then, when Pyrrhus's cavalry struck from the flanks, the Roman line finally buckled. The Romans lost around 7,000 men, yet they managed to make an orderly retreat to the north, their honor almost intact. But Pyrrhus was not a happy man. He had lost 3,000 men with no way of replacing them. Costly as it was, the victory had its advantages. Several Italic peoples, the Lucanians, Bruttians, and Messapians, joined Pyrrhus's cause, along with the Greek cities of Croton and Locri. The Romans now faced an uphill battle. Driven out of the south, they watched as Pyrrhus pushed north, sealing an alliance with the Samnites, who had already joined Tarentum in resisting Rome. Pyrrhus struck a deal with his new Italian allies. If they helped him now, he would help when Rome came for them. But Pyrrhus wasn't exactly a man of his word. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. In the spring of 279 BC, Pyrrhus marched against the Roman colonies of Luceria and Venusia. The Romans were in serious trouble. To keep their allies loyal and their armies in the field, they minted new coinage to pay for the war effort. With about 40,000 men, the Romans faced Pyrrhus again in battle. Once again, they were driven back. Pyrrhus tried to storm the Roman camp but failed to take it. His army lost about 3,500 men, while the Romans suffered roughly 6,000 casualties. Those numbers might not sound huge today, but in the ancient world, they were devastating. A major city like Athens had only between 360,000 and 610,000 people in total, and that included women, children, and slaves. The irony was that Pyrrhus, despite winning, was furious. He had been wounded by a javelin, watched his camp go up in flames, and then realized that victory could feel a lot like defeat. According to legend, he complained, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." Maybe it was dark humor, but that line would go down in history. It gave us the term Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly that it's hardly a win at all. Pyrrhus had beaten Rome again, but he was no closer to restoring his power in Macedon or building the empire he had dreamed of. The Romans agreed to a prisoner exchange and promised to keep their hands off of Tarentum, but that wouldn't last long. Pyrrhus himself agreed to an armistice and effectively abandoned the Samnites and Lucanians to future Roman attacks. Then, when Carthage attacked Greek Syracuse, Pyrrhus sailed off to Sicily, leaving his Italian allies in the lurch. And the Romans took their chance, defeating the Samnites, Lucanians, and Bruttians in his absence. Meanwhile, in Tarentum, Pyrrhus had left behind a garrison, and that didn't sit so well with the locals. They began to suspect he had plans of his own for the city. Their message was clear: either come back and fight or take your men. To win back their trust, Pyrrhus marched against the Romans once again, but this time he was defeated. Frustrated and out of options, he sailed back to Epirus with his tail between his legs. Soon after, the people of Tarentum surrendered to Rome. Now, the Romans rolled through southern Italy like a tornado and brought the Greek cities of Magna Graecia under control. Rome was rising fast, and everyone knew it. And as with all empires in history, Rome cloaked conquest in the language of liberation. They claimed they were saving these people from themselves or from some other looming power. The Greek-born Roman writer Plutarch later argued that conquered people were actually fortunate. By being subdued, they were made civilized. But for the Greeks, proud of their heritage, Roman rule was bitter medicine to swallow. They considered themselves superior in every way. To them, the Romans were barbarians. The Greek word barbaros originally meant foreigner, imitating the barbar sound of strange tongues. At first, it wasn't meant as an insult, but over time it became one. The irony was that Roman elites, the upper classes who set the cultural standards, would learn to speak Greek fluently. Greek would become the language of philosophy, literature, and high culture. So even as Rome became the dominant power of the Mediterranean, it still looked up to the Greeks. They knew very well after the Pyrrhic War that they could beat the Greeks, that their more flexible legion formations could get the better of the Macedonian phalanx. Nowhere was this more obvious than in the Macedonian Wars, a series of campaigns fought between 1214 and 148 BC. At first, the Greeks didn't see Rome as a conqueror of all their lands. Rome presented itself as a useful ally, even an honest broker. Smaller kingdoms and city-states, sick of Macedonian domination, invited Rome to intervene as an arbiter. And Rome was only too happy to oblige for a price. After taking over Tarentum in 272 BC, the colonies of Magna Graecia were effectively absorbed. But while Rome had the south sewn up, it had its hands full with another giant, the Carthaginian Empire, the Punic power based in North Africa. Over the next century, Rome and Carthage fought three massive wars, the Punic Wars. The First Punic War, from 264 to 241 BC, took place mostly on the island of Sicily. Carthage had deep roots there, and the most important Greek city, Syracuse, was caught in the middle. At first, Syracuse sided with Carthage, but after a Roman advance in 263 BC, King Hiero II switched allegiance. He cozied up to Rome for the rest of his life. Elsewhere in Sicily, smaller Greek cities split their loyalties, some leaning to Carthage, others to Rome. The war was chaotic, but in the end, Rome triumphed. Sicily became its first overseas province, while Carthage had to surrender its fleet and pay crushing reparations. But Carthage was far from finished. It still had an ace up its sleeve, Hannibal. The Second Punic War from 218 to 201 BC cemented Hannibal's place in history as one of the greatest commanders who ever lived. He marched his troops, about 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and dozens of shivering North African war elephants, all across the Alps from Spain to Gaul and into Italy. It was one of the most audacious moves in military history. Elephants crossing snow-covered mountains was something no Roman had ever imagined possible. And then Hannibal unleashed hell. He beat everyone who came at him. At the Battle of Trebia, at the ambush at Lake Trasimene, and especially at Cannae, he dealt the Romans staggering defeats. At Cannae alone, more than 50,000 Romans were killed in a single day. It's maybe not so surprising then that several Italian allies abandoned Rome to join Hannibal's cause. For years, Hannibal roamed the Italian peninsula like a nightmare come to life. Roman children literally grew up with the phrase, "Hannibal near the gates." He was a real-life boogeyman. But he could never quite crack the walls of Rome itself. Despite his victories, the Romans refused to negotiate. Instead, they adapted, avoiding direct battles with him and striking at Carthaginian territories abroad. In Spain, Roman forces slowly drove the Carthaginians out under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio, the man who would later become known as Scipio Africanus. Once Spain was secure, Scipio carried the war into North Africa. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his homeland, but at Zama in 202 BC, Scipio crushed him in a decisive victory. The result was another surrender. Carthage paid more reparations and watched on as Rome claimed Spain and several Mediterranean islands. It had been a brutal fight with the Carthaginians, but Rome emerged stronger than ever. Its victories remembered for centuries, retold in the bloody spectacles of the Roman arena. The Third Punic War of 149 to 146 BC absolutely devastated the Carthaginian Empire and added some extra abuse. Besieged and starved, Carthage itself was stormed by Roman legions. The city was burned to the ground, maybe between 450,000 and 750,000 slaughtered. Ancient sources say 50,000 survivors were taken into bondage. North Africa was annexed as another Roman province. Rome was now unstoppable. But while these wars raged on, Rome was still dealing with the Greeks, a civilization from which it would also take many slaves, including heady thinkers who would teach the children of Roman elites. The First Macedonian War, fought from 214 to 205 BC, began while Hannibal was still rampaging through Italy. Philip V of Macedon, thinking Rome too distracted to respond, allied with him in hopes of expanding his power across the Adriatic. In the end, neither side achieved much. Rome was overstretched, Philip was cautious, and the war fizzled out in a negotiated peace. But the Second Macedonian War from 200 to 197 BC was a different matter. This time, Greek powers like Pergamon and Rhodes begged Rome for help against Philip's expansion. At the Battle of Kinoskepalae in 197 BC, Roman legions crushed the Macedonian phalanx. The great phalanx that had once been unstoppable under Alexander was now no match for Rome's flexible, manipular formations. In 196 BC, at the Isthmian Games, Rome proclaimed that the Greeks are free from the Macedonians. It's complicated, since the Macedonians had become a part of the Greek world, but many Greeks, especially in the south, had long regarded them as semi-barbarian outsiders. So when the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus declared Greek freedom, he was tapping into an old resentment. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Rome's gift of freedom was what liberation always meant for the Romans, a leash. And as always, the Greek city-states remained fractious. Every time they asked Rome to mediate their disputes, Rome's grip tightened. Help always came with a price. The Third Macedonian War from 171 to 168 BC pretty much finished the Macedonian Empire. Philip's son Perseus tried to restore Macedon's strength, but at Pydna in 168 BC, the phalanx collapsed once more before Rome's indomitable legions. This time, Rome abolished the Macedonian monarchy and broke Macedonia into 4 client republics, a warning to anyone who still dreamed of independence. In 150 BC, a pretender named Andriscus claimed to be the son of Perseus and tried to restore a united Macedonian kingdom. It didn't go well. His rebellion ended in disaster, the last of the Macedonian Wars, and Rome turned Macedon into a Roman province. But even then, some Greeks resisted the strong arm of Roman dominance. The Achaean League in the south, a confederation of city-states that still hoped to preserve autonomy, rose up in defiance. The rebellion didn't last long. The Romans crushed the rebellion, and the Greeks never again tried to challenge Roman rule. Rome went into brutal mode. It destroyed Corinth, a glittering hub of Greek commerce and culture. Roman troops carted off its many treasures. Adult males were slaughtered, while women and children were sold into slavery. Not for the first time, Rome had been extreme. It was a warning to Greek states never to attempt anything like that again. General Lucius Mummius, who ordered the sacking, was treated to a hero's welcome, but to some in Rome it looked like an act of cultural vandalism. Those people weren't savages, not like Rome's former enemies in Carthage. Greeks deserved better. Later, writers like Cicero and Plutarch lamented the loss of Greek liberty and criticized Roman greed and violence. It was actually that same year when Rome had annihilated Carthage. So in more or less a single stroke, the two great old rivals of Roman power, Carthage in the west and Greece in the east, were erased as independent forces. Rome was now the supreme master of the Mediterranean world. Politically, the Greeks were finished. What had once been the most innovative and brilliant collection of city-states in the Mediterranean was now fractured, dependent, and firmly under Roman control. Economically, Rome's campaigns drained the city-states, and later demands for tribute pushed many communities into poverty. The Greek elites did fine. They were simply threaded into Rome's endless network of patronage. But Rome was always insecure. It could defeat Greece militarily, but it couldn't match Greece as a force of culture. The Romans soon adopted Greek myths, but reworked them in the Roman way. Greek philosophy was deeply respected, with Roman greats such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius following the paths laid before them by the Stoics centuries earlier. Platonism and Aristotelianism would become table talk for Roman intellectual elites. In a world corrupted by greed, Socrates was a symbol of integrity, and Diogenes' cynicism seemed noble and all too relatable. Greek theater and epic poetry were inherited. Greek art, much of it looted, was adored. Greek historians, Herodotus, Thucydides, and Polybius, would inspire and educate their Roman counterparts. In medicine, the Greeks Hippocrates and much later Galen were hugely influential, their teachings shaping medicine for centuries. Rome had conquered the world, but Greece conquered Rome's soul. Rome may have conquered Greece, but its real power came from the soldiers who built an empire. Watch 50 insane facts about the Roman legion to uncover the secrets of the world's most disciplined army, or click on this video instead.